Hey, you! What are you doing over there? You can't cast Leomund's tiny shelter here. Go get a room and an inn, you cheapskate mage! Hello, fellow world builder, and welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds. Today, I would like to talk about ubiquitous magic systems, the impact they have on your world, and how you should make them feel believable to consumers of your world. Before we get into it, please do subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. It really does help me make more content of this nature. Okay, let's get into it. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to break down the areas of impact of a ubiquitous magic system, and then I'm going to give you 5 key things that I think that you should do to make a ubiquitous magic system feel real to the consumers of your world. Okay, let's get cracking. First, what is a ubiquitous magic system? A ubiquitous magic system, in my opinion, is a magic system where more than 50% of your population have got access to magic in some form or another, whether that is through items or through their own innate power or whatever the case may be. Now, what impact does this have on your culture and on your societies? Let's start with utilities. Utilities in this context is things like cleaning, heating, food, sewage. How does your magic impact those things? So a good example of this actually comes from David Eddings' second series in the Sparhawk universe, the Tamuli. Here, the characters visit a city called Soros, which is where the Styrics live. Now, the Styrics are a people who use magic a lot. And they use magic to, among other things, light their streets. So instead of having torches, they have magical lights. And the characters actually comment on how different this makes the city smell, because you don't have that lingering smell of people burning, combustibles in order to make heat and light. So think about how people can use magic to service the utilities, and then consider how much different that makes the world. Think about all the senses that are employed: smell, taste, look, feel. If you have less air pollution, do people live longer because of it? All of those kinds of elements. Another good example of utility magic in this fashion comes from the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. In the later books, Dresden has a deal with some brownie fairies, and they clean up his house. And his friends comment on how his house has suddenly stopped being, a typical bachelor's pad and turned into this beautifully manicured place. And having magic used for such a purpose really makes that secondary fairy tale world feel so real, in its impact on Jim Butcher's world. Which brings us to economics. So economics in this context is transport, logistics, services, labor, all of those kinds of elements. And what you need to think about here is, what has magic replaced? What does magic do better, and what impact has that had on the world, right? So, for example, in Eberron, which is a D&D setting, a Dungeons & Dragons setting, there are gnomes that capture elementals into gems, and they use these gems to power ships, giving you ships that can fly, ships that can travel at speeds comparable to our modern day transportation. Now that has obviously dramatically impacted on trade in Eberron. And so it should. Your trade network should vastly expand if you have access to flight. Now, how does that kind of thing then affect your more normal, mundane travel? Do people even use an oxen cart anymore? Do you have oxen? How do farmers get their produce to market? If there's all these magical options, is there space for normal people and normal transportation anymore? If you're running a D&D campaign, are you ever going to have a random encounter if people can just travel by magic? So these are important elements to consider. A good example from literature is Anne McCaffrey's Talent series. So in the Talent series, you have telekinetics, who are the backbone of your interplanetary system, where they move ships and people and goods from one planet to another. And this obviously has quite a dramatic impact, because it means that you can have an interstellar network of planets trading between each other. So that was a really great way of having ubiquitous magic feel very, very real. Then in the entertainment world, what changes when magic is ubiquitous? If you think about Korra, the Last Airbender, which is the second Nickelodeon series, they have a sport there called pro bending, which is teams of 3 elementals competing to hit each other off a platform. And what happens is those athletes are regarded as heroes by the people, which makes it very relatable, because we look at sports people like that, right? We want their signatures, we want selfies with them. And it was the same with these pro bending athletes. So it's this weird sport that, we have no equivalent for. But the way that the people react to that sport make it believable. It makes it a real world. Then maybe you have mages who produce stage plays that have special effects on par with movies. And you have these spectacular productions where, instead of using fake magic, you use real magic on stage, which could make for spectacular use in the performing arts of magic and make magic feel very real in that fashion. What about law enforcement and the military? How do you contain a mage? How do you imprison a mage? How do you punish a mage? Do you have anti-magic prisons? Do you have special punishments? Can you lock away somebody's magic and control it? So that's a very important question to answer when your magic is that ubiquitous. In the Butcher, in Jim Butcher's Dresden Files again, his main character Harry helps the police in finding paranormal criminals, and he uses kind of voodoo equivalent magic to follow people. What if you have that? What difference does that make to law enforcement? What if your law enforcement has got access to things like truth spells? How does that change people's criminal behavior? How do you get around a truth spell? And then in terms of the military, have you got a Cold War kind of scenario where everybody is afraid to cast the first fireball, because then everybody casts the fireball and you turn your whole continent into a parking lot? What about necromancy in the military? It's pretty horrifying to think about your buddy getting up off the battlefield and coming to eat your brains. But what if a country can do that to a whole battlefield? How do you counter that? How does that impact on your funeral practices? Do you burn bodies to stop necromancers? How do you deal with that? And speaking of necromancers, exotic locations and people, right? So True Blood, the HBO series, did a great job of what would happen if vampires became legal people. Yeah? How does that impact people inheriting estates? Like, do you give the money back when the person rises as an undead? Are they considered the same person? Can you fire somebody if they're undead, or do they keep working their old job? Like, how does that even work? So, and that's a great thing to examine, is what about exotic locations and people and creatures? In the Eberron world again, there's a city called Shan, which is built vertically because it's connected to the plane of air. So you can fly between the different levels, in essence. And the way that they make that city, in my opinion, feel really relatable is the poor people live at the bottom and the rich people live at the top. which is just so typical. Like, it's the super exotic location, and it, you can fly between the levels, and it's connected to the plane of air, and it's built vertically instead of being built, in a spread out fashion. And the poor people are stuck at the bottom, and the rich swan around at the top above the clouds. I mean, could you think of anything more typical of people? And then finally, speaking of poor people and have-nots, what about the people who don't have magic? So we said 50% of people have access to magic. What about the other 50%? How do they feel? Are there terrorists who counteract the magic? Do they protest? Have they brought in legislation to try and prevent magic from taking their jobs? So a good example of this again is Anne McCaffrey's Talent series. In the first Talent series, where these telekinetic talents are starting to emerge, there are organizations that are actively trying to prevent talents from entering the economic life. And this, and they have terrorist plots against them as well as legal action. And that makes it feel very real, because you can see it today with the introduction of self-driving vehicles. The transport industry is trying to prevent self-driving vehicles from becoming a reality because you can't compete with them. What happens to those people who can't compete? Do they just become the scum of society? How does your society handle it? I mean, that's a big question. And that brings me to those 5 things that you should do if you have a ubiquitous magic system. Add 1 utility spell. Add 1 thing that handles purely with utilities. Have elemental fire running under your city that burns up the sewage. Maybe have an oven that people walk past and they take food, right? And think about the impact that has on your society. Because if people just make food, they don't need farmers anymore. So what happens to all the farmers? Is fresh food considered, is it like Star Trek, where fresh food made from scratch is considered this true delicacy? So build in 1 utility thing and think about the impact that has on your world. In your economic life, replace 1 economic aspect with a magic thing. Maybe that's transport. It is an easy place to start. But maybe you have a whorehouse populated with illusions that, can make your wildest dreams come true. Maybe you have somebody who creates clothes using magic, and you no longer need tailors. So take 1 thing and replace it with magic, and think about the impact that has on your economics. Create 1 form of entertainment that's magic based, whether that's a sport, or whether it's, a mage putting up a play, or maybe it's using illusions to put up a play, or maybe somebody makes movies. Think of 1 part of entertainment life that is replaced with magic. Think about how mages are captured by law enforcement and how they are punished for magical crimes. And then lastly, think about how the have-nots, how those people who don't have magic are treated by society. Think and create 1 organization that combats magic, whether that is legally or through terrorism. And introduce 1 piece of legislation that is a bureaucracy that resists magic, right? Whether it's something like in my opening scenario where you're not allowed to cast magic in certain places because, you'd put the taverns out of business if you could just erect magical shelters all over the place. Or maybe you need a special license to move goods from place to place as a magician. Or maybe you can only park your magical carpet in designated areas. But introduce 1 piece of legislation that the anti-magic group has succeeded in implementing. Because what this does is it makes the consumers of your world believe in the impact of magic, because these are things that they can relate to. And that is my advice for ubiquitous magic systems and how to make them feel believable. I hope you found this content useful. Please do give the video a like if you did. Please comment down below where you think ubiquitous magic systems have been used used really well and made really believable. And I will see you next week for another episode of Just in Time Worlds.